Hey there, this is Dennis Anyone with Dennis Hensley. It's a podcast about making things up and making things happen. I love talking to creative people. I think art and creativity make life bearable in tough times like this. And today my guest is Kyle Henry. He is a filmmaker. His documentary is called Time Passages. It's about his mother who's dealing with dementia in the film. It also deals with the history of his family. COVID is part of the story. It's very unique and original, and I related to a lot of it. And I really loved this conversation with Kyle. Before we get to the interview, though, I want to remind you that this podcast, Dennis Anyone, it's brought to you by me. I do it. I love it. It gives me a sense of fulfillment, and I love it. But if you want to support it, help me pay my bills, I would love that, too. You could do that at DennisAnyone.net. There is a virtual tip jar there. You can leave a tip there. And there's also a thing called Buy Me a Coffee, which is pretty self-explanatory. The other thing you could do is become a subscriber to DNR Studios. I'm part of a group of shows under the Derek and Romaine Crazy Podcast family. And for a monthly fee, you get my show early. You get all these other cool queer shows. So check that out at dnrstudios.com. Also, since I recorded this original intro, I have talked to Kyle, and I'm going to be moderating one of his Q&As in Los Angeles when he comes out here. It's going to be on Saturday the 15th at the Laemmle Cinemas in Glendale, the 7:30 show. It's going to be Kyle as well as a caregiver named Deb Kurtz, and I will be asking the questions. So join us if you're in LA. All right, here's the interview with Kyle Henry. Joining me now from Boston, Massachusetts, it is Kyle Henry. He is the filmmaker of Time Passages, a new documentary about his life and his family, and specifically his mother. It's beautiful. It's different than any documentary I think I've ever seen, and I'm very excited to talk to you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm so excited to be here to talk with you about the film.
How would you describe it? Because it's not a typical documentary. I don't know any other documentaries where the filmmaker himself puts on a wig and does a scene. Like there's all these different flights of fancy and different ways of telling the story. How do you describe it?
I describe it as time traveling through my family's archive to try to understand myself and my relationship with my mother. And I think a lot of us, when our parents are approaching the end of their lives or they pass, have to put the pieces together and create a story. And sometimes we just have fragments, from the photographs, the home movies, the diaries, the medical bills, the whole mess sort of a life.
Yeah.
And also the stuff that's left over, the sticky stuff that maybe we still need to resolve for ourselves so that we can let that person go.
I think that's what I related to most about it, because I've done some thinking around this myself. You mentioned the things that are left behind. There's a sequence where you just put out everything that was in the safe deposit box, and you kind of put it on a table, and you shoot it, and you look at it, and you're like, oh, that's somebody's life. That's all the stuff they thought was really important. I've been thinking about my own family history. My parents have been dead quite a while. My mother passed in 2000, my father in 93. And as an adult and doing what I do now in terms of this podcast and other things, I really love to get people's stories. I like to find out about them, all this stuff. Never did it with my parents. I only ever saw them as my parents. I never really saw them as young people with dreams, how they met. I'm not even sure how they met. Like, I really know nothing. In doing this film, were there things about your family history that surprised you that were like, wow, I did not know that was part of the story?
There were, and I think part of it is we simplify our parents, right? Like every child only knows their parents through their own lens. And we come on the scene after they've had lots of years under their belt.
Right.
And we only kind of know them through their stories that they tell us. But also we make the parent into what we need them to be. And sometimes they can be, demonic in some ways, or like over the top, in terms of how we see them as being confrontational with us, or they can be the savior, in our lives, but we don't realize, what a complicated person they were at work. We're many different things at many different stages of our lives. And I think part of the process of growing up at a different stage of our life is seeing our parents as people, even if it happens after they pass, and even if we're in midlife. So many films focus on what we call coming of age, and
right.
That's, that 16 to 22 category. There are different gates that we walk to that are other coming of ages, and one is from youth to adulthood, and one is from adulthood to like midlife, and one is from midlife to the third act of life, and they are just as traumatic and transformative, I think, as that 18 to 22-year-old period. I think the shocking and humiliating thing is when you get to midlife and you're like, gosh darn it, I'm having these problems again. Like, I thought I put this stuff to bed, I
talk about this a lot on the podcast, especially with dad stuff. Like that emerged for me in my 50s, and I put a lot of pieces together and explained a lot of things. But boy, I was not done with that. In fact, I barely even started doing it. I turned 60 this year, and so I'm
congratulations.
Thank you. I'm looking ahead at the golden years. Boy, it's not looking good. You know what? I'm looking around going, what's the good part? Like it's not fun to get old. I'm trying, Cher's, I think she says it. She's like, it sucks.
Yeah.
Man. So, and that's part of this film that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Your mother struggles with dementia in the film.
Yeah.
Like, in other words, tell me it's going to be okay, Kyle, because I don't know what's ahead.
I think one thing that I've learned from talking to people who are older, and I don't know why, but I was one of those gay kids who always wanted to talk to old people. I was sitting on the porch with the, grandma down the street, interested in her stories. One thing is we can do is not care about the small stuff anymore. Not let the small slights or the things that used to irritate us about relationships, let it the F go, because really it does not matter. We are small, insignificant little blips, like even, the orange one right now.
Right.
In the grand scope of history, unless he builds a pyramid, he gonna be forgotten. And sometimes, I went through 10 years of therapy and a kind of special flavor of therapy called Jungian psychoanalysis. And part of what is their jam is what they call relativizing, like trying to make our stories really important and investigate all the family stuff and get all that in the house in order, but also put you into some sort of cosmic perspective. And part of that is like, okay, you're stardust, you're small things, and maybe that can help with the anxiety. I think with my mother, blessedly, she returned to a state, I think she was a teenager or even in junior high school at certain points. Sometimes I was her brother. Sometimes I was her father. One time I visited her and she was like, "You're cute." And I was like, "Oh my God, my mom flirting with me?"
That's so Back to the Future.
Yes. And I think when you deal with dementia, the hardest thing to do as a family member is to take them for who they are now. Right. And to be with them in the moment. But, they never stop being mom and dad. Whereas a caregiver, like a professional care worker, they just know Elaine as this, 85-year-old woman with dementia, and they're not fazed by her in the same way that sometimes I would leave the, nursing home just like weeping because I remembered who she was, and I wanted to see what was happening as loss. I don't think she was experiencing loss. I think she was experiencing still joy. She liked singing. If you have somebody with dementia, and that's in the film too, we really connected with singing and like being able to sing songs with her and bring her out of her fog. Yeah. And see that kind of joy that she had. That brought me joy, and not to see her story as one of just loss, but of like, wow, she's living in the moment. I can't do that. I got to go do a Zoom and do work and, talk to a student.
All that stuff. Your story partly takes place during COVID. She's in a nursing home, and remember the nursing homes, how that was like where it was really, really bad. And like you get these notices like somebody on her floor got it. And we don't know if you're going to get to see her again. And you do. And it is so moving And the way she is in that scene, like she's so happy to see you, right? What do you think of when you look at that footage? I mean, I'm sure you've edited and you're used to it, but that footage of that meeting is like, whether or not you made this movie, I feel like it's worth gold.
I was shocked. Only me and my sister were allowed in that room. You know, she was in hospice, and we kind of begged them to say, like, who cares? She's dying. You know what I mean? Like, if in the last moment of her life she gets COVID, she's already lost like 30 pounds. You know, she's wasting away. We just want to be able to touch her. And so my sister had her cell phone.
Right.
And darn it all, if she wasn't more lucid in that moment and pointed to this photograph of the two of us in it and was responding and saying good when I asked her how, you know, she was feeling. And this is also something I think that is a gate that we walk through, which is dying. And I think that if anyone's experienced the loss of somebody in the room, and I know a lot of older gay men, you know, experienced this during the AIDS crisis, it can be traumatic, but it can also be a time where there is a kind of quickening that occurs. And sometimes people get like really lucid, you know, near the end. And she passed away days after I visited her. Maybe it was like a week at the most. And so I look at that footage and go, like, gosh, what a gift.
Yeah. She's like, I'm going to give you your ending. Here we go. You know, it was almost like, it was just beautiful and pure and clear. Like you could see what she was feeling in a way. And yeah, I'm happy that you had that, as a person. It's wild. There's something about moms and gay sons. I saw a movie last night, a Sundance movie. We got to stream it called Plain Clothes, which is wonderful. But there's a character in it who's not out yet, but his mother is mourning and he dances with her. And I'm like, oh, that's a gay boy thing. Maybe the straight guy would dance with her. Maybe the straight guy would sing with her on Zoom like you did. But I think gay boys do that stuff. Thoughts?
Well, you know, I'm going to get all Jungian psychoanalysis here on you.
We love that stuff. We love that.
But there is this notion of gender and Jungian psychoanalysis of like what they call the anima and the animus, which is basically like we all contain within us elements, even the straightest of the straight man, elements of the opposite gender. And like, you know, we know gender's a spectrum. We know It's not like some binary, but at the same time, our poor little brains as human beings like to form opposites often, or oppositional pairs. You see that in couples, like in, you know, even in queer couples, it's like, wow, opposites attract, you know?
Right.
And I feel like when you're queer in some way and your gender is maybe more aligned with the parent that if you were straight would be seen as oppositional, you know, then you're going to have that relationship in some ways that, at least for me, a lot of gay boys have relationships that are very much like what daughters have with their mothers. And the same thing with, like, you know, lesbians have with their fathers, where you're able to kind of exist in a way where they're not so alien and other and different. You know, there's a kind of alignment that occurs. I remember when I came out, my mother had problems at first, and I think her biggest problem was around, this was like early 90s, around fear, you know, that I was going to get AIDS. And of course, and then also, you know, at the time, people who were queer weren't having children. And I think her identity had so formed around having children that she was like, oh, you're going to miss out, you know, on that. It's so wonderful now, unless, you know, again, things progress negatively over the next 4 years, you know, that we are in positions now where we can have that experience of parenting. And it's not forbidden, you know, It's not walled off. And so, I also felt like, my husband says this often, but we live out our parents' sort of karma, or like not their karma, but their desires or their hidden desires are imprinted on us. And she was a woman, wanted to be a fine artist, you know, went to a large state school, Kent State University in the 50s. And after World War II, it was like, you know, women, you need to go back into the home. Or in the case of fine arts, it's like, you know, it's Jackson Pollock time. It's abstract expressionism. You know, you just need to go and teach children.
Right. You're going to be an arts educator. Do you feel like, as a filmmaker, your stuff is very artistic. It's very visual, very creative. Do you feel like you're kind of living out a little bit of her dream in a way?
Oh, are you kidding me? Yes. And
Did she feel like you were?
She was so proud. She was so excited. Both of my parents were. My father was this Marine Corps drill instructor, and he would, go to my films, and he'd be like, "Kyle's taken us to some really interesting places I never thought I would go." And I was. It sounds almost paternalistic, but I was really proud of them.
Yeah.
That at 60 they could incorporate something really they weren't expecting and have to roll with it. And God forbid. I hope when I'm confronted with the same kind of challenge, maybe that I can also be as flexible and malleable and changeable.
Yeah. Do you have children?
I don't have kids.
Right.
And me and my husband knew we were both artists. My husband's a playwright and a theater director. We were like, we were maybe self-aware enough to know that a lot of artists, forgive me artists who are listening, but, there's a lot of horror stories of artists and their children.
Right.
Who the art takes so much.
Right.
And sometimes the children get the short end of the stick.
Sure.
And so I just don't think that was in the cards. And I'm glad we found each other.
Yeah.
Because I remember my husband's mother pressuring us for a while. I was like, come on. She was a Presbyterian minister. And
right.
she was like, I'm sure you want children. I'm sure you want children. We were just so thankful when Carlos's sister started having kids, because it's like, ooh, the heat's off us.
Well, there's a lot of that cliche of like, oh, they want grandchildren. They want grandchildren. And I'm like, well, they'll get over it. No, if they don't have grandchildren, what the fuck are they going to do all the time? Like, that's what I'm looking for. This is my other 60-year-old epiphany. I have a lot of people around me or in my peer group where the world seems to want nothing from us. They're sort of done. So if you have grandkids, you got something to do. You can go to a recital. You got something. You're needed, right? In a way. And so, like my sister and her husband spend so much time with their grandkids. They talk about them all the time, and they go to every soccer game and all that stuff. And I'm like, oh, I get it now. Because there's not like, oh, come and do all this other stuff. The world wants you to do all this other stuff, but you're choosing the grandkids. No, there's not. That's one of the only games in town. I don't know.
Well, thankfully, I edited a documentary for a great filmmaker, PJ Raval, years ago called Before You Know It, about 3 sets of gay elder men,
right.
Confronting these same kind of issues of like not being seen. We stop being seen. And, so much obviously of our younger years is tied up into how we are seen, by other people and gaining value, through our identity that way. But the great thing, I think, is once you start seeing the need that exists in the world for help, for volunteers, for like, you could endlessly spend your time working for nonprofit organizations who will love you.
Right.
Your LGBTQ center, your, elder care center, like, it's not, I know it's not the same, but it's also like we can find other communities.
Yeah.
And it can be outside of who we thought our communities were when we were in our 20s and 30s.
Yeah. When I was in my 20s, I worked for a couple of years at the Jewish Community Center here in Los Angeles. And I was doing graphic design and flyers. I wasn't Jewish, but that was my job. And there was an older guy named Irv that would come in and help us with all our mailings. He was a lifesaver. And I was thinking, well, Irv is so good. He always comes in and he does this. And now I'm going, oh, that gave him, it was meaningful to him to come in and do it. It wasn't like he had 20 other great offers, but he'd rather lick stamps. Like I see, all right, I'm turning into Irv is the point. And I hope to, because it was meaningful and it mattered and it helped and he was part of something, we have something interesting in common that kind of comes up in this movie. I'm the youngest of 6. You're the youngest of 5.
Yes.
I'm gay. You're gay. Did you have other gay siblings?
No.
Me. I'm the one. No.
Yeah.
And there was 8 years between you and the next one.
Yes.
There was 8 years between mine. And
wow.
I was, I think, an oops baby for sure.
Yeah.
And I always kind of joked about it. It never had meaning to me. And in the last 10 years, I'm like, that has profoundly shaped how I feel I fit in this world. I think my mother rallied to be everything for me. And your mother said, there's a quote in the movie that kind of like really resonated. When you were born, she said, "This one's mine." Like,
yeah.
And I feel like my mom said that, but I feel like my dad was done. And so I never felt wanted by him, literally. And I think it's affected the way I move through the world.
Yeah.
And I was so touched that your dad got on board with you, with all of it. And he's interviewed and he talks about how your mother was a mentor to him. I found that so moving. Like he was able, he comes from a drill sergeant. You talk about that.
Yeah.
He was probably not unlike my dad. Very strict rules about what it means to be masculine and all that stuff. And he broke out of that mold over the years. And I thought that was really cool.
You know, it's so interesting. Again, when we go back in time, things were very different around World War II.
Yeah.
Gay people were kind of everywhere, and that society didn't care because they needed us. They needed us to fight. The war effort needed people.
It was all hands on deck. We didn't have time to judge the hands.
So my dad told me the story after I came out of meeting, a fighter pilot who was he was in the Navy before he was in the Marines. And when the purges began post-World War II, and that was really the deal, it was like, women get back in the home and, we don't know if we want these gay people around because they were so ridiculous. It's like, they could be blackmailed by the Soviet Union.
Right, the Lavender Scare stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but it also was a kind of way in which bigots within this military and the society could sort of put us back in our place. And then this guy had a partner, and they said, well, either you give it up, and you can continue to be a firefighter, or you quit the military, and you quit the military. And it had such a profound and confusing effect on my father because he was like, this guy gave up his whole career for this relationship with another man. And I never could figure it out. Like, if it was a disease like they were telling us it was, it seemed a lot like what somebody would do for love.
Right.
And so who knows why? He was a special, strange, small-town Ohio dude,
But how was he when you came out?
So he was also, they were both the same age, born 1930, so they were both 60.
Yeah. And you came out at 21 on Christmas Eve.
Yes.
In a letter or in person?
In a letter, which I brought home and then gave to them and then went upstairs.
That's so good. I sent my letter. My father has passed, but I mailed mine. And I don't have it anymore. I thought it was on my computer, but I can't find it. But yeah, I remember when I wrote my letter, I was pissed that I had to, that because of society, I had to do this thing. Yeah. It was right before my first novel came out. And so the jig was going to be up. The cat was out of the bag. And I'm sure they had feelings about inklings, but we just didn't talk about things like that. And so here I was on the cusp of having this great moment, this achievement. And, you might also devastate your family.
Yes.
And I felt pissed about that. But it all worked out. It was all good. There's a little thing in your movie, this little sort of sidebar you do around the company Kodak.
Yeah.
And that commercial, The Times of Your Life, which we all remember.
Yeah.
Remember when Kodak was a thing, when film was a thing, when you would go to Costco and look at photos? Talk about that part of the movie and why you felt that was important to include.
I am a kind of person who always looks at historical context as well as the personal story. And I'm curious about, like I say in the film, I'm curious about the forces that shape our lives, that maybe create our personalities in ways that are stronger than, the American story is all like pioneer spirit, or we create ourselves, or, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I suspected, and as I started watching those commercials, that it's a chicken and egg thing. Like, did the commercials shape the idea of what the family should be, or did the ideas of the family shape what
were they just reflecting reality, or were they shaping reality?
Yeah. And Kodak was so powerful. The image, and it was all about family, nuclear family, document everything, every moment of your child. I mean, people do it with their cell phones now.
I mean, now it's times 100 with social media and cell phone, like crazy.
Which I wonder sometimes, it's like, how the heck is anyone even going to find anything?
Right.
And it's like some parent in the future is going to be like, oops, the hard drive died, and like everything's gone.
Everything's gone.
Where the house would have to burn down,
Right.
before you would lose everything. So it was important for me. Also, it was important to see the kind of shadow side of the things that are really positive to get the full picture. And I love Kodak. I love film. I love shooting on film. I always wondered, like, when we were doing photography classes, we're just dumping these chemicals down the drain. There was something
Right.
about it that was like, is this really a good idea? And, to know that Kodak Corporation dumped a lot into the Genesee River in Rochester, New York, their home headquarters, it's kind of the bird that soils its nest, and I just think it's important to remember as we think of other major corporations that would love us to think that they are angels, that we always have to look for the shadow side of things to protect ourselves and to protect our communities.
Also, speaking in terms of contemporary life, in terms of the tech companies, when they have made it very clear that they don't give a fuck about the well-being of the Commonwealth. They don't.
No.
They don't care. Mark Zuckerberg does not care that his product...
He doesn't?
that his product... He's told us. You know what I mean? Kodak had something kind of... I mean, I wasn't up on the company culture or anything, but it felt like it kind of cared. I don't know.
Well,
the commercials felt like they cared.
I wonder sometimes, the whole startup culture is so perverse. The companies used to be founded with the idea that we'd be around for a couple hundred years. We're embedded in community. We're part of a community. They began out, Eastman Kodak began in Rochester and stayed in Rochester. These kind of transnational, global financed startup culture, Silicon Valley things are like, let's just make it real big, figure out a way to make money, sell it while the stock is high, get loaded, and move on.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So I don't think people are thinking about the long-term commitment, which is, it's kind of like a culture that is binging and purging right now. It's no bueno. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but
no bueno. There's a moment in the movie, it reoccurs a few times, where you have a conversation with your mother, where you sort of play both roles, and she says things that I think you find reassuring.
Yeah.
Where did that idea come from, and how did you write her lines?
So there is a therapy improv message from Gestalt psychology, which was like a kind of process-based therapy. And one of the things is called the empty chair exercise, which is if you can't speak to someone who you're having real problems with, either because you no longer literally can speak to them because they're dead,
right,
or your relationship is so damaged with them, you can set up two chairs and ask a question in one chair and physically sit in the other chair and try to think of how they would respond and go back and forth with a dialogue. Now, in reality, we know we're having a conversation with ourselves. We're not having the conversation with the other person, but it puts us literally in another position. And it also, for me, felt like channeling.
It could be an enlightening exercise.
Or doing improvisatory acting. Any of you who've done acting before, the inhabiting of a role sometimes feels like possession. And so the wig was kind of important, although that wig did not turn out exactly.
You know what? If it had been too good, you know what? Nicole Kidman has made a career of wearing bad wigs, and I also love her. So you're in good company is the point. And I think that wasn't the point. Like I wasn't looking for a lace front, from that.
No, there was a professor, Carrie Hawks, who teaches at the New School last night, who was talking about, queer people in drag, and like, just like, there was like kind of like a drag performance that you were doing. And I was like, yeah. And as we all have learned from 17 seasons of Drag Race, there is something empowering about mask work, and, for me, it did let something go. I would say that if people see the film, know that on the opposite side of that is always my husband, who I had direct me. I needed somebody to call me on my BS and push me further as a performer in that moment, to be genuine and honest and go deeper in the same way when I work on fiction films I do. So it wasn't just me in the room, but it was about 4 hours of trying to get to something real.
In terms of what she says When you as her say, is it what you think she would have said, or is it what you wish she had said, or would have wanted to hear? Or is that hard to know? You can't know.
It's hard to know, but it's also, that was shot after I had shown a cut, I think, to one of my, no, I shot this before I showed it to my sisters, but one of my sisters was like, Mom, I think, Mom wasn't that way with me. Mom, was different than sort of how you're portraying her. And my explanation is I got my parents during their midlife crisis.
Yeah.
When everyone else was gone.
Same.
They got the kind of go-go the years of the 30s when there was a lot of joy. And they also got to see them when they had grandkids. And so I didn't know I needed this, and it came out of improv. But when my mother said, you only got one small part of my life. Like, don't sit there and try to label me or say that you know me.
Right.
Let go of this idea that you're going to pin me down. I think we kind of have to do that with our parents as children. We have to let them be. And I needed to hear that. So in some ways it was a therapeutic moment for me.
Yeah, it's effective. And unusual. You do something else with these. They look like the Fisher-Price Play Family dolls. Are they, or did you have to make up one that looks like them because you couldn't get the rights?
You're so funny.
No,
because you nailed it.
Because they look like them, but not exactly.
No, well, they're peg dolls, and peg dolls existed before Fisher-Price,
right?
And many people make them online, and at a certain point, I realized there's this little movie called Barbie that came out, and Fisher-Price dolls are now owned by Mattel.
Oh, man.
And I was like, okay, well, I played with Fisher-Price, but peg dolls exist. And I luckily have an artist friend who could make these dolls look like the photographs of us instead of just being the generic dolls. And so... But I did play with little dolls. I did stage natural disasters with them.
Right, you would react like Poseidon Adventure with Play Family. Yes. Amazing.
Half of you die.
And you just don't know who's going to make it. You don't know who's going to make it.
Who's going to live? I would traumatize my poor next door neighbor who I'd play with. This wonderful young girl, because I just wanted to see who would live and who would die. She's like, can't they just all live?
No, only 6. Only 6. In the Poseidon Adventure, only 6 live.
There you go.
Yeah, there's a few that we really emotionally need the audience to live. There's a few you could take or leave, and then it's just that's you're making those decisions. Did your parents love that you played with those dolls like that in that way? It wasn't exactly a Barbie thing, but it
was acceptable. This is a kind of I could be a closeted undercover queer at 9 years old. I was like, what? He's playing with Fisher-Price. They aren't Barbie dolls,
right? Yeah.
So, it was ridiculous, but it was a little gay boy activity for sure.
Right. When did you sort of start to make this? When did you think this is a project, and how did it take shape?
The year before COVID hit, 2019, I worked with some artists to create the first opening black box thing that you see in the film where there's all these projections.
Yeah.
And I combined it with, I saved every voicemail message that my mother had on my phone starting from around 2010. And you could really hear her mind go from 2010 to 2014.
Right.
I could not listen to that stuff without just bursting into tears. And the grad student of mine who became one of the 2 editors, Abigail Vandersmith, I gave the voice message to, and was like, can you just please trace her mind falling apart and combine it with this footage? Because I want to make a film about memory and time. And we had that, and we had it as a sample, and that helped get grant money. But no one can expect the Spanish Inquisition. And when COVID hit, the producer of the film drafted me to start doing video diaries as part of a PBS project that was canceled by PBS, which was supposed to be about how were people responding to the run-up of the 2020 election, common Americans. And he drafted me as a ringer, as somebody who kind of knew how to use their cell phone like a camera.
Right.
But after the show was canceled in June, I just kept going with it because I realized, oh my God, I don't know how much longer my mother's going to live, and I'm documenting my own feelings about this time of crisis. This might be worth something to people after this is all over.
And then you decided to start turning it into what it ended up being.
Yes.
It's interesting in terms of art that was created during COVID, is about COVID, shows people in masks. For a while, that's all we saw because that was all that was available. And then I think we went through a period of like, we don't want to think about that anymore.
Yep.
And then you're kind of coming back and like, no, it happened. I saw a friend of mine named Alonzo Duraldi, a film critic, the other night. I mentioned this already on the podcast. And somehow we got to talking about the Nicole Kidman AMC thing. And I where she does the AMC commercial.
Yeah.
I love it in every way you can love a thing. Campy and sincere, all of it. And he said to me, he goes, I think one of the reasons it still resonates is it's one of the only things we have in culture that remind us that we went through that together. And I think there's part of the power of that, why people clap for it or why they hope that they don't take it away, is because it reminds us, oh, that thing happened. How do you feel your movie is doing that for the people that see it? Were there people that were like, I don't want to see that. It's COVID-y. I'm not into it. The COVID of it all and how people are responding.
In some ways, it's a Trojan horse movie, right? Because it's about this family, about time and memory, and I put that as its first foot forward. So I think some people show up to the film like, what the hell? This is going to involve COVID, But I also think it's really important for us psychologically to grow up as human beings, to integrate things and not repress it.
Yeah.
And that was repressed trauma. And it's also an example of something, I forget who the psychologist came up with it, called unrecognized grief. We all know as gay men what happened in the AIDS crisis and how no one wanted to recognize it, how our grief wasn't recognized, how really important that quilt was.
Yeah.
On the mall to say, this is happening, people are dying, and we're going to make this visible, and you have to grieve this. We have to mourn as a nation. I remember how important it was when Biden had all of those lights on the mall.
I remember that.
And I just remember weeping because it was like, again, the orange one, there was like a kind of mass, it's not real. It's not really happening. We can deny, we can hide. And I think one of my friends always says, the truth will out.
Will
the
it
truth
though?
Will out. I think it does. Sometimes it takes a generation digging up the foundation of a house and going like, oh my God, there's bodies underneath this house. I think the movie like The Shining is all about repressed trauma. If you watch that film, which I love that movie, if you watch that movie, it's all about, this whole hotel is built upon pioneer violence in some ways, and it is coming back. It is going to come back, and family violence, domestic violence. It's it's all there, and it's going to pop out unless you deal with it.
I feel as a culture, we haven't really dealt with COVID.
No, we haven't. I hope we do. Another, example of unrecognized grief, which I think a lot is, it's grief too that can happen when you're going through your own trauma and grief, and everyone around you is happy. It's like somebody who loses a child through a miscarriage, and people are like, get over it. You can always have another kid, and it's just hard when we're out of sync. This is why the Greeks had tragedies and had horrible things happen to their kings and queens in these stories, and kind of got together every year and watched these horrible things on stage, on theater, so they could probably cry together. Yeah.
There's a moment in the movie where you're wearing a face shield, because we all remember masks, and people still wear them, and that's great. But, remember the shields? I remember I saw you in your shield, and I was like, I went to a spinning class in a parking lot wearing a shield.
I know.
For a few months. And then I remember when they said, okay, you don't have to do that anymore. And I remember throwing the shield away. It was beat up, but we did it. And I hadn't thought about that in a while.
Yeah.
I don't know. You're right. I think we haven't really processed it.
It's hard. I mean, I'm glad it's not what it was. And, I'm glad we're at until bird flu or something breaks out. Like, enjoy your time, people.
Yeah.
Enjoy your time.
You dedicate the film at the end to Carlos, my co-passenger in time. I assume that's your husband.
He is my husband,
right.
Yes.
I love that. How did you guys meet?
We met at an anti-Valentine's Black Hearts party in Austin, Texas.
Please, I want to go to that.
It was so Gen X, and it was like angsty grad students and people getting drunk. And I remember, I got totally wasted and was angrily telling off one of my professors who had, this is one of the reasons that as a teacher, I don't go to grad student parties, I don't want to see students drunk. I don't want to have somebody and I thought your class, you really could have taught us more. And I see this guy looking at me, hiding behind a door, looking at me in a mirror. And my girlfriend, she's like, somebody's looking at you. And I walk over and I said, what the heck is going on? Who are you? Why are you just looking at me? He's also so drunk. He grabs a hold of me, kisses me, knocks me down into the middle of the floor of the party. And people are like, ah! And and then we danced the rest of the night. I was like, was it an assault or was it
was it love at first sight? I know.
Yes.
But I love that it was at a Black Hearts Valentine's. If you put that in a movie, it would be too,
it's too much.
It's too much. Yeah, it's too much. But I that's amazing. What songs did you dance to? What era was this? Is there a song that you think?
Oh, it was probably a combination of because in the 90s, trash disco was a thing, and trash disco night. But it was probably a combination of that. Who knows? Somebody was probably spending as a DJ. It took place at this fabulous house called The Garden, which this director, Athena Rahil Sangari, who made this film, the Attenberg, Chevalier, she's a sort of international art star filmmaker, was living at, and it became this kind of gathering hub space. And so there was always interesting, amazing people kind of floating through that space. So it was Austin. What can I say? Trend cities. It was Seattle in the early 90s.
Yeah, very cool. Just a great story about how you guys met. I had a thought, and I lost it. It's flying out of my head. Oh, here's my thought. What has the film been like to show to audiences? What do they talk to you about afterwards?
So many things. People are coming up crying, telling me their personal stories with their loved ones who have passed. They're telling me stories about how hard it is to be a caregiver now with somebody who has out. I had a friend, take a night off to come on Friday night. It's I just had to get out of the house. And, my mother's with my cousin right now. I've had people talk to me about the funny stuff in the film of I've had people talk to me that I'm brave, and I kind of resist that sometimes in terms of just I actually don't necessarily like personal documentary as an art form if you're not revealing all aspects of yourself, if you're trying to give an advertisement image, of yourself. And I think people see maybe part of themselves in the attempt to show all of ourselves because, we're many different people, and we're a different person at work than we are at home, with who we are with our friends, who we are out at a club. I'm sure we're different people when we have dated different people in our lives.
Right.
And that attempt to integrate, I think people really respond to and recognize. And then some people have never seen, it's a weird film. Like you said, you haven't seen a film quite like this. For me, it's sort of a test to try to see, can people put puzzle pieces together and make their own story out of this, and not have everything be sort of neatly buttoned up in a package, for them.
Yeah.
I think we're much smarter than we give ourselves credit for. And I love those films from the 60s and 70s that make a big impression on you, but leave you with lots of questions.
Yeah.
And that's what I hope to keep that little tradition alive as best I can.
Yeah. Here's something related to your film that you may have insight on. It's not really about your film. It seems like more and more people are dealing with dementia, people that are suffering from it and people dealing with it in their family. Is it is it because people are living longer? Is it on the rise? Is it just my imagination? Do you know anything about that in terms of statistically?
Well, one thing is demographics. The baby boomers are the baby boomers, and they, as a generation, outnumber Gen X. They're huge. They won't leave Congress. They're a large generation.
Exactly.
And so, therefore, their children have to deal with them, and they are all in the window now, right? And so there is this explosion. We don't have enough care that we need. We don't have enough care workers. There's not going to be place in a nursing home for everyone. So a lot of families are like, how do I do this at home?
Yeah.
And so that need is there. You just saw it last week when they tried to stop funding to Medicaid for a while. And the outrage of people rising up kind of across the country, even in red states, was like, okay, we can't do that because too many people need this because their partner needs to go to work,
Right.
Somebody needs to look after mom. It could be because we're living longer. It could be, we are definitely living way longer than we were before. It could be environmental pollution. I mean, we've dumped everything in the kitchen sink into everything that we eat. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. And I feel like it's going to be a test of who we are as a people for how we treat those people at the end of their life with dignity.
Yeah.
Are we going to be like that congressman in Texas when COVID hit and they were like, well, old people are just going to die.
Yeah.
You gotta go out to work. And if we lose some people, we lose some people. Or are we going to think it's worth it for our soul to honor those of people who carried us by carrying them to the end?
I have a friend who's dealing with it with a parent, relatively new.
Yeah.
What advice do you give to people that are starting to go on the journey that you went on?
Get help.
Yeah.
Get help. If it's, don't do it all alone. Is there a respite center you can, drop mom or dad off in the afternoon so you can get a break? Is there limited in-home care that you can get, through even 4 hours? We started my mom with 4 hours a day so we could make sure that her medicine was taken and we could make sure she got one meal, because that's at first what we could afford. Get that. Demand from our representatives that they get the money that we need. We pay taxes for something.
Yeah.
And I don't think we need another missile as much as we probably need care workers who can be there when we need them so we don't go all nuts too. Because I think in terms of just dealing with your parents, try to realize that they're not going to stay the people they were before. They're going to be something different. I think some people have a really hard time when they have real big problems with their parents and they're like, I want mom or dad to account for what happened, or I want to ask them questions about, and then you're going to have to just deal with those big existential questions of you don't get everything that you want.
Right.
And how do you let go of control? Let go of control. You're not the center of the universe. You don't get to control things. Pray to your gods or goddesses for just the serenity prayer.
Sure. Exactly.
Yeah.
This movie says a lot about America and about how we treat older people and what systems are in place, things that we're talking about now. I wrote down an amount, and I can't remember the exact context of it, but you can clarify. $1,700. What was that?
That was all the stuff, the furniture, the objects. We brought somebody in to do an estate sale, and this is always a joke too. I think a lot of people are like, "We got that valuable, desk down."
Right. When you hear estate sale, you think antiques that are worth a bunch of money.
Yeah, and once the estate sale happened, and once the person got the cut who did the estate sale, and once all the stuff that isn't sold because it ain't gonna sell, half of it, and you gotta pay for somebody to haul it off. $1,700 was what was left for everything inside the house. The house itself was worth $175,000, and that became one of the major three legs upon which my mother's care was given for. And that also is what is the most valuable thing for elderly care in the United States is people's homes. And this is why everything that happened historically that affected the value of a person's home, or when they were able to buy, and what's going to happen even in the future.
Right. All these people that can't buy homes that would like to aren't going to have that nest egg to, yeah. Oh, man.
I think about all these poor people, in California right now who had the fires, and it's like their home went up in smoke. That's also elder care.
Yeah, that's wild. Now, did you mention students? Do you teach?
I do. I teach at Northwestern University, which is in Evanston, Illinois, kind of right outside of Chicago. Go Cats!
And they do a lot of art stuff there, like acting and stuff, right?
Oh yeah, we're a world-renowned school. I mean, we're I think ranked like 7th or 9th in the nation.
Yeah.
But we have a really great theater program, like Stephen Colbert, Louis Dreyfus, like, Warren Beatty went there. I mean, it's a star-studded theater program.
And what do you teach?
So I teach filmmaking. I teach directing, working with actors, documentary filmmaking, producing, editing.
Very cool.
I was an editor for 15 years.
Yeah.
Kind of how I made my money. Before I started teaching.
Do you like it?
I love it. I ain't going to have kids.
Right.
And this is a way that I can hopefully, sometimes I'm like, give that up, but like save the new generation.
Help the new generation or share what you've learned, what you've been through.
Yes.
I created this party game called You Don't Know My Life with a friend of mine. And I occasionally go out and host game nights. And last Monday night, I did one at a friend's college class. So these were all kids who were in high school during COVID. Yeah. And they're young and they were cool. I really like them. But they tell stories in this game. And they were dealing with shit that somebody was like, I got caught vaping in this thing. And there was fentanyl in the thing. And I was like, oh my, I think what young people are dealing with now, social media, so much. Do you see that? Do you observe that in your work, or are they?
I've been teaching for 14 years, and I've seen an explosion of mental health crisis.
Yeah,
real, and it's calmed down a little bit. I think it was at its worst a year or two during COVID and right after, and. They also are growing up with the knowledge of climate crisis. And I think we were I didn't realize it, but you and I grew up at the height of an empire.
Yeah.
It was past World War II.
And it was a given that you would do as well or better than your parents.
Yes.
That was a given. That wasn't something you questioned.
No.
Yeah.
That's not the case. And as you can see, we're having just a real hard time transitioning.
Well, there is all this stuff in your movie about you march for Black Lives Matter, and you're like, COVID was a wake-up call and there's a reckoning coming. And I'm like, yes, there is. All these things are going to change. And then I'm like, no, look where we are. Like, there was a reckoning, and anyway, I don't know. I have no thoughts, but it was just like...
what was it? 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah.
That's what I got to hope for.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do? You're going to go just home and watch YouTube videos all the time?
No. I have an idea that I'm percolating with, and we seem like-minded on this, and so maybe I'm going to bounce it off you.
Sure.
Here's my idea, because all of my progressive friends are like, not sure what to do, blah, blah.
Yeah.
We feel a little powerless, whatever. Donald Trump's going to die someday. Might be tomorrow. It might be 20 years from now.
Yeah.
I say we start planning the party. Where are we going to go? What are you going to do? What are you going to wear? This is history. The pictures are going to live forever. You're going to want to look cute. So figure out the outfits. If you're going to go dance in the street, what street? Make a plan. Plan that shit now. And is there a way that we can do this, viral party planning for the moment? What's going to be on the playlist? Which Village people do we want? We want the good ones, not the assholes. And also there's some power in the idea of planning this thing. I don't know.
Was that the Emma Goldman quote? It's like, I don't want to be part of any movement that doesn't include dancing.
Yeah.
That is so gay.
But I was talking about it at a dinner party, and I kind of hit on the idea, let's start planning it. And we all lit up. It was the happiest any of us had been in a month. And I was like, my phone lit up. I've got 8 bouncy houses donated. Look at that. Like, what are you going to bring a covered dish?
Do whatever you can to not let your spirit be crushed, because that somebody doesn't get to possess our soul. And
no.
Listen, even at the height again of the AIDS crisis, from all those people that I know who were in the trenches, what they found was an intense purpose and solidarity in life.
Yeah.
That, again, I don't wish that upon anyone, but realize that in those moments of crisis is a potential to connect with humans on a real level.
Right.
That can make your life feel extremely worthwhile.
Right. And part of the idea of this idea was you're going to want to be with people.
Yeah.
You're going to
definitely.
want to, you know what I mean? You're not going to be wanting to read it on Twitter. You want to.
Well, let's not wait until he die. Let's have like a party 2 years ago now when the midterm elections.
Exactly.
Let's work on that.
Exactly. Anyway, I was that captured my imagination. I think there's some power there somehow.
Yes.
One thing I also wrote a note down. You wrote in your diary, I lie a lot. Is that right?
Yeah.
That made me chuckle. What were you lying about? Gay stuff or everything?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Gay stuff. Like, I think at that time, I was living in a house with 4 other guys, all straight, off campus, and I would just sort of disappear every once in a while. I was dating. I was dating a guy who was a lieutenant in the Army.
Ugh,
and I was this nerdy kid in Houston, and so he would come and like pick me up in his car.
Would he be in uniform ever?
Sometimes, because he was in the reserve at that point.
Right on.
He would do like active reserve stuff.
Oh, man.
And sometimes when we both came out, it was so funny because we'd go out and people were like, "You are the biggest opposite couple I know." Like, he was at that point like Texas A&M,
right?
Part of the Corps. He had gone. A former basketball player, and I was like geeky theater
right?
And which I love those kind of stories too, because it says like love can come in many different forms,
right?
And you just don't know. You just don't know.
Yeah. So that's why you were lying a lot. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was having too much fun, and I didn't want anyone to say no.
All right, I love it. Yeah, you weren't beating yourself up about lying. It was just an observation. Yeah. It wasn't a problem, just a thought. I have another little thing I want to ask you about from the ending, but first tell people how they can see the movie.
We're on tour nationally.
Yeah.
You can see us if you're in Los Angeles starting the 14th of February at the Lemley Glendale for a full run. I'll be there on Friday night and Saturday night at 7:30 p.m. But go to our website, www.timepassagesfilm.com, or on any social media at timepassagesfilm. And you'll see where we're at. We're coming to hopefully a town near you.
I love that. And you're on the road with it. It's fun. I might try to come to Glendale if I can.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, I know I have plans for Valentine's Day, but are you just doing the one Q&A?
No, it's the 14th and the 15th. And if you want to moderate a discussion,
I'll do it in a heartbeat.
You in as a moderator. Yeah, that'd be great.
I'll do it. Let's reach out. Let me make sure I'm free and I don't have plans.
Sure.
I could do one of the two. Oh, that would be fun. I love doing that stuff. And you're also coming to Canopy, I think I read.
So and at the end, after the tour in April, we'll be available on Canopy, which is, use that library card.
Canopy
use that
rocks.
Canopy.
It's gay.
It's awesome.
It's super gay. And there's recent stuff on there. So I love it. Here's my final thought that I want to talk about. You have these wonderful quotes from your mother before the dementias really started kicking in. She was very wise about life.
Yeah.
Like, enjoy every day, she would say stuff like that. And did that stuff take with you when she would say it? Can you talk about how it seems like she kind of figured out how to live.
It sticks more with me now as I'm solidly in my middle ages than it did when I was younger and I really wanted to just like make it all the time. And I was working 14 or 15 hour days and just kind of grinding my life, to get where I'm at today.
Yeah.
But I get what she means now. And, I'm not going to miss that cocktail hour. I'm not going to miss that porch coffee talk with a friend for a couple of hours because we just don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, and I might as well enjoy it now.
Right. I love that. She also said, be happy that you are who you are.
Yes.
That's beautiful.
She, again, as somebody I think who was a Slovak, second generation immigrant in the middle of Ohio and maybe was a little bit otherized herself, realized, and she was poor, like she grew up and had worked 3 years before she went to college. She realized that, people aren't going to always treat you as a special person that you need to know that you are. They're going to label you because of your surface.
Right.
And she just didn't want us to limit ourselves. And maybe in ways that she herself limited herself.
Yeah.
She didn't want us to have the same issues.
I love that. That's beautiful. Well, people should watch the movie, come out and see it if it comes to your town, or watch for it on Canopy. And I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dennis. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks again to Kyle Henry. Learn more about his movie Time Passages at timepassagesfilm.com. All right, so this happened. I'm going to talk to you about a few movies that I saw. One I mentioned, I think, in this podcast or the last one. I went to a screening at the Egyptian, which is a big theater in Hollywood, of Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar with Kristen Wiig and Annie Mumolo, and they co-wrote it together. And Jamie Dornan is the male lead, and he's delightful. Anyway, it was a movie that came out during the pandemic. So I first remember watching it at a friend's house, and we had all did a COVID test so that we could go in and watch it. And it was funny, but it wasn't the same as a theater. And let me tell you, this place was packed. People were dressed up in costumes. And it was just so, first of all, hilarious. Just really funny and out there and crazy and original. And had a lot of heart. Like the friendship story at the heart of it was really moving. And it was touching because the filmmaker and Annie Mumolo, who co-wrote it, and is in it with Kristen Wiig, they were both there and had never gotten to see it with an audience. And the production designer who had won an accolade from the LA Film Critics for the production design, he was there and he got to get his award. Anyway, it was just this moment of real joy to celebrate this thing that didn't get to have this experience a few years ago. So if you haven't seen that movie, it is funny as hell. And I hope it's one of those movies that gets played at summertime rooftop screenings and stuff like that, because it is really fun to see with a group of folks. And the other two movies I saw were part of the Sundance Film Festival. You could stream a few things online. So a few friends and I got together and watched two movies that were at Sundance this year. One is called Sally. It's a documentary about Sally Ride. And a lot of it is focused on her 27-year life partner named Tam, who's one of the narrators in the film. And it was basically about how she had to stay closeted basically all her life, Sally Ride. She was the first female to go into space, and the movie shows a lot of the sexism that she dealt with and, what was awesome about her. But the thing that was really poignant was that she had this whole part of her life that nobody knew about until after she died. So Tam is a wonderful person, and she's still alive. Sally died at 61 from cancer about 10 or 12 years ago. So anyway, it was a beautiful movie, and so watch for that documentary. The other movie I saw was called Plain Clothes. It's a story set in Syracuse, New York, and it's about a cop whose part of his job is to entrap gay men in restrooms so they get arrested. And it stars Tom Blythe, who is a British actor. He was in the Mockingjay, I think it's called the Mockingjay Hunger Games movie with Rachel Ziegler. He's been in other stuff like The Gilded Age. He was kind of new to me. Man, he's sensational. And also Russell Tovey is in the movie. And they meet in a restroom, and they have a kind of a little interaction that lasts, through the movie. Anyway, you've seen a ton of coming out stories, where if you follow gay films and stuff, where somebody's gay and they don't want to be in there in this world. But this one was fresh in a way. Like imagine being in the closet and part of your job is to do what he had to do. And then the movie goes into places that you don't quite expect. It brings up all these other themes having to do with his family And the filmmaking is really audacious. He uses different kinds of stocks, and it kind of looks like video camera from the 90s. Anyway, I was knocked out by it. So keep an eye out for those movies that haven't come out yet, Sally and Plainclothes. And hopefully they'll be hitting cinemas soon, because they were both terrific. All right, that's enough for this week. Apologies for my voice. Still hanging on a little bit to the cold residue in the voice. I want to give a shout out to Oscar Rosario for mixing the episodes. My theme music is by Mark Daniels for Placement Music. Catch you next time on Dennis Anyone. Bye.